Hello everybody, welcome to another video from ArcGIS Associates, now part of the Davie Resource Group. So in this video we're going to talk about what's new in ArcGIS Pro 2.6, right? So this is going to be the new version of Pro that's just about to come out. So ArcGIS Pro 2.6 was talked about a good bit at the Esri Virtual Users Conference the other week, and I think generated a good bit of buzz and excitement because this really is a long-awaited release as far as I'm concerned. And I've been using Pro since before it was released to the public, back when it was still just beta at 1.0. So with this new version 2.6, we're seeing a lot of improvements that have really been on the list from users for a long time. So we'll take a look at those in a minute. We're just going to hit some highlights. I'm not going to cover everything new in this new version because honestly I don't have the time, nor do I have the data to show you everything, but I think you're going to be very excited by what you see. And we expect this new version to be released any day now. The beta trials for this ended last Friday, and that's what I'm running right now, is a beta version that I'm going to show you. But like I said, we expect this to be released out either the end of this month, first part of next month. So really any time now. Okay, as one would expect, in the middle of recording and processing this video, Esri has actually dropped ArcGIS Pro 2.6, so it is now available through the My Esri portal for download. So if you have access to that, you can go ahead and start downloading 2.6 now. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn you back over to the regularly scheduled video. So what kind of things can you expect in this new version? As I hinted at, there's a lot of good improvements, but before we get into that, we want to talk about some of the hardware requirements for ArcGIS Pro in this new version so that you are aware of what to expect with that. For anybody that's been running Pro for any amount of time, is probably aware that just because your computer can run the older ArcMap and ArcCatalog and even ArcScene and ArcGlobe software doesn't mean that it's really going to run ArcGIS Pro well. ArcGIS Pro really does have a much higher hardware requirement than any of the older applications that it is set to replace. So at a minimum to run 2.6, and honestly, these haven't changed since 2.2 at least, but at a minimum, you're going to want a dual core processor. And if you're not sure what dual core and all that is, I think I have a video that I did a while back on some older versions that kind of really explain the hardware requirements a bit more, but I'll try to link that somewhere in here. But yeah, you're going to need that dual core or two core hyper-threaded processor, a minimum of 4 gigs of RAM, DirectX 11, Shader 5.0, OpenGL support for 4.5, and 32 gigabytes of free hard disk space. So those are the very minimum requirements needed to run the software. I'm going to tell you, if your computer's down at that low end, you're going to have a very bad experience running ArcGIS Pro. It just doesn't do well with that minimal amount of hardware. Then Esri recommends, this is what they recommend as a setup, at least a quad-core processor. Obviously more is better, but at least a quad-core processor with 8 gigabytes of RAM and a dedicated graphics card. Right, so that dedicated graphics card is going to have a dedicated GPU or graphics processor unit on it and dedicated video RAM. And they say a minimum of 4 gigabytes on that. And then with that, you're going to support DirectX 11 and Shader 5.0 and OpenGL 4.5 on there. But yeah, you definitely want that dedicated graphics card. You do not want to be running integrated graphics. And integrated graphics is where your primary CPU for your computer handles not only the processing load of running the software and performing calculations like that, but it's also handling the graphics load on there. And Arc Pro is a graphics intensive application. I mean, you can see that from ArcMap, right? But Arc Pro takes that to a new level because you can do 2D and 3D maps, and it just is much more intense. So you definitely want that dedicated graphics card. You still need 32 gigabytes of free space. Own an SSD or a solid state drive, whether that's a traditional SATA solid state drive or an NVMe drive. Either works. NVMe is faster than a traditional SATA drive, but it's preferred to have the SSD as opposed to the traditional platter drive. If you are stuck getting the platter drive, don't go with the slower 5400 RPMs. You really want the 7200 or 10,000 or higher RPM drives if you're stuck using those physical style hard drives in there. Now, what Esri says is optimum, and this is a big change. It said this came out at 2.2, but if you haven't checked in on this, they really say optimally you want a 10 core or more processor. That's a big jump. Even my computer that I just built last year is only got 8 cores in it. So to get a 10 core processor, you're looking at an Intel i9 processor or a Ryzen 9 processor from AMD. So those are pretty high-end CPUs. They're not cheap. So that, again, optimal. It'll run on less than that. I mean, I run Pro on my 8-core computer here that I built, but they're really saying 10 core or more is optimal. And believe they do have 10 or more than 10 core processors out there. I think they're up to, they have some that are up to like 32 cores now, if you've got the money for that. They say 16 gigabytes or more RAM is optimal. I would back up and say that's recommended. I would not really try to run Arc Pro without at least 16 gigabytes of RAM in most cases. That's my suggestion. And again, that dedicated graphics card with that GPU and video RAM, 4 gig of RAM for video is pretty good if you're just doing traditional 2D type mapping. If you start getting into 3D rendering, or you start working with LiDAR data, point clouds, or a lot of raster data, those kind of things, then you probably want to get more. You want to get 6 to 8 gigabytes of video RAM on that dedicated graphics card, if at all possible. So then the other supporting DirectX shader and all that's the same. And again, the same hard disk space. So what's really changed here from the original 1.0 versions up to 2.1 was the number of cores that Esri is saying is optimal. Can you get by with less than 10? Absolutely. I've got 8. For 2D maps, basic analysis, quad core is probably still sufficient. But if you're really doing hardcore analysis, you're trying to work with those big data sets, things like LiDAR, voxel layers, and things like that, the more cores you're going to want, because that's what all of your analysis is based on. So now let's look at the software requirements. ArcGIS Pro is and has always been a 64-bit application, so you obviously would need a 64-bit operating system. Back earlier, I think it started this year, they dropped support for Windows 7. That's mimicking what Microsoft did. So you're going to need 8.1 Pro or Enterprise, or Windows 10 Home, Pro, or Enterprise from a traditional desktop operating system. You can also load this on Windows Server operating system, whether it's 2012, 2012 R2, 2016, or 2019. And Arc Pro continues to not be supported natively on Linux or iOS at the moment. I have heard, now I haven't tested this, but that if you boot a Mac or an Apple computer, MacBook Pro, whatever, into Windows and run Arc Pro on that Mac device, it actually runs better than in a traditional Windows computer. Again, I've never tried that. I don't have a Mac, don't want a Mac, but you may try that if you have a Mac. And I would not be surprised, because I notice a lot of Esri employees are actually toting around Mac laptops. So maybe that does work. You will need the Microsoft .NET Framework 4.8 or later. So this is a change. It used to be 4.6.1 with, I think, 2.5 and earlier. So this is a change. You need to make sure you've updated your .NET Framework to 4.8 or newer. Now, I've included this, but they've dropped it from the official list of software requirements, and that's Microsoft Internet Explorer 11 or above. And that's because I don't think you can get either Windows 8.1 or Windows 10 or any of the server OSs without Internet Explorer 11. So it's still got to be on there. It still leverages it, but they've no longer listed as requirement because it's there with the OS, and there's really not a lot you can do about it. But it's still something that gets used. Anyway, so and of course, if you're still using, I should say still, if you are using named user licensing as opposed to single-use licenses or concurrent licenses, which ArcPro does support, then you're going to need an Arc Online username and login, or a login for your portal for ArcGIS there as well. So you've got to have that if you're using the named user licensing. And that hasn't changed. That's consistent with all the past versions. So that kind of gives you an idea of the new hardware and software requirements. So let's take a look at some of the new and improved functionality that's been added in this new version of ArcGIS Pro. So one of the things they've done is they've added map graphics and text. Oh my God, that's something we've been wanting for so long, the ability to put those into a map. And I'll show you that in a little bit. Disabling and enabling editing. So in Arc Pro, for those that haven't looked at it, you've always been in an edit session. There's no starting and stopping editing like there has been in ArcMap. Now you could set what layers were editable and which ones weren't. And if it wasn't made editable, you couldn't edit, but you didn't start and stop editing. And a lot of ArcMap users really miss that safety net. So they've kind of incorporated that here into Arc Pro, and I'll show you where that is. Project file recovery. So Arc Pro uses project files. For anybody that remembers all the way back to ArcView GIS, that's what I'm looking for. You worked in APR files, project files. Well, Arc Pro uses the same concept. They're APRX files, but what we've never had is if the project crashed, you lost everything to the last time you saved. Well, with Arc Pro 2.6, there's now a recovery option so that it will periodically make a recovery file that you can pull back if there is a crash or an issue. So I'll show you where to set that up. Map series, that's the same thing as data-driven pages. Again, for those that were ArcMap users. Well, up until this version, you could use a regular grid index, a regular index, and a strip index for that functionality. Well, now you can also use bookmarks in a map. I'll show you that. We'll talk about the trace network. This is something that they've added with 2.6 that replaces the geometric network, so that will be a nice little discussion. Thanks to Autodesk and Esri working more closely together for the first time in a long time. Well, I think last time they worked well together was the 90s. But we see this now in Arc Pro 2.6 with greater integration. There we go, with BIM and Civil 3D from Autodesk. So the ability to pull data out of a BIM system or out of Civil 3D drawings, whatnot, that's also been greatly improved. So with that, let's go take a look at some of the changes I mentioned, as well as some others I didn't, so you can get an idea of what you can expect coming out of this new version. Okay, so here I am now in ArcGIS Pro 2.6, and keep in mind I am running the beta version because the full version hasn't come out yet. So don't be surprised if something crashes or whatnot. It's been pretty stable, actually more than pretty stable. It's been very good, I should say. So let's go and talk about a couple of the things I was mentioning first with like the project recovery and some of the editing options that have changed. So go to the project tab, I go to the options here. So under the general tab, if you look down here, you'll see project recovery. So this is where you can turn on and off the ability to create that recovery backup for your project file and how often it does it. So by default, it is enabled and it will do it every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes, it's going to create that recovery backup for you. As far as I know, it only is, that last backup. I don't know that it keeps multiple recoveries available to you, but do keep that in mind. So that's a nice function. So if a system crashes, you can recover, and I actually have had that happen, and it pops up, you want to use the recovery file. You hit yes or okay, and in it comes. It's great. So that's always nice. That's a new option there. I think they've added this as a new option as well. This, do you want to participate in the Esri user experience program here? So yes or no. So you can change that if you selected yes and you meant to say no. I was doing the beta program, so yes, I clicked yes. Probably will turn that off later, but we'll see. Okay, so the rest of these haven't changed there. So let's go down to another one, and that's going to be here under editing. So this is where I was telling you about the making Arc Pro. So you had to basically enable and disable editing, which is the same as start and stop editing in ArcMap. So that's this checkbox here under session. It's this, enable and disable editing from the edit tab. So if I were to check that box, which I'm not going to do just yet, you'll get a new button. Still have the autosave options and things that have been there before, so that's good. So we'll check that out in just a second. I just wanted to show you where that is. Let's see, another thing. So, oh yeah. So the CAD and BIM integration we're talking about. So if you are accessing BIM data, you have something like Revit or whatnot on your system, you can point to folders or files where you may find things like textures, building textures, wall textures, those kind of things that would be in there, or any other images or whatnot that's referenced in your BIM. You can point to that. That way that when you bring those files into Arc Pro, it will have access to those surfaces and whatnot to render that information properly. So that's something that they've added in here. See, there was something else that I wanted to, oh yeah. So getting down here to the user interface. So this is something new, as far as I know, in 2.6. I don't remember this being in 2.5, but so for example, when you open an attribute table, by default, it's going to pop up in the docked window below your active map, but you can change this. So it goes ahead and automatically just opens in a separate floating window, or it's stacked on top of the active view, whatever you're looking at, be it a scene, a map, or the project, or whatever. You can change that here. And we have similar options for charts, videos, and model builder. So that's something I think that's new in 2.6, or relatively new. I said I don't remember seeing that in 2.5, so that's kind of neat. Let's see if I see anything else in here. I don't remember anything, but it never hurts to verify. In here. So no, I think that pretty much covers it. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to change anything at the moment. I'm going to go back so I can show you how that enable, disable editing works. So right now in Arc Pro, right out of the box, I'm always able to edit data, right? Depending on what I have set as editable layers. Right now I don't have any editable layers, but if I were to go in and enable, say, parcels and roads and all that, those are editable at this moment. I can go in and use my select tool, zoom in here, select, well, also make sure it's selectable, select a parcel, and I could edit. I can split it, I can change the attributes. There's no starting and stopping editing at this point based on what I have set up here. Now if I go back, I haven't done any edits, but if I go back here under those options into editing, and I check this box, enable, disable editing from the edit tab, and I go okay to that, and go back, notice there's a new button here, this edit button. So I couldn't make any changes to this parcel until I enable the editing. And notice when I clicked on that, it highlighted, the little dot appeared up there, the attribute buttons, and all these become active. And if I disable that, all the editing tools go grayed out. These buttons here for create, modify, and delete get grayed out. So that's the same as that starting and stopping editing that we had in ArcMap. So, it's up to you if you want to do that. I've kind of gotten used to not having to do that in Pro, but it does give you that safety net option if you want to do it that way. Okay, so that's kind of a neat function. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, because remember, by default, this option is not enabled. You have to remember to enable it, just like you'd have to enable the autosave or save edits when saving the project, so forth, so on. Okay, so that's one change. Another change, which is not, I don't think, a big deal, but so certain tools like the select by attribute, select by location, these are actually geoprocessing tools. So they would open in the geoprocessing pane. So for those that may not know what that is, if I go to analysis and tools, this is the geoprocessing pane. So these, what we called windows in ArcMap, are called panes in ArcGIS Pro. So I'm not going to say my joke about ArcPro is full of panes like I normally do. I guess I did. But anyway, right? So this is where you would access all of those geoprocessing tools to do normal things like buffer, union, intersect, all those things that we do from a geoprocessing standpoint. Okay. Now, in older versions of ArcPro, when you click select by attributes, it would open the geoprocessing pane with the select by attributes tool in it. And this can take a little bit of time and whatnot. So they put these in their own free-floating window. They're still accessing a geoprocessing tool, but it's just in its own free-floating window as opposed to being over here in this pane. So this one does it. Select by location does it. And even some of the tools you access by, say, right-clicking on a layer, like if I wanted to export this out to another data set, shapefile or something like that, this also opens in its own kind of free-floating window. So they've done that with a lot of the tools that you access via the interface. Makes them a little bit more responsive than having to crank up the geoprocessing pane and do some other things. But again, not a big change, fairly minor one, but something you ought to be aware of if you're accustomed to older versions of Pro. When you click here and you expect your geoprocessing pane to open, but suddenly this opens. And it looks a little bit different. Okay, it looks slightly different than what you'd see in the geoprocessing pane. Not a whole lot, but slightly. Big difference is in this one you have apply and OK buttons, whereas in the geoprocessing pane you have a run button. So it does the same thing, works the same way, just is presented a bit differently. So that's something to make mention of. Another neat tool that they've added in here that I thought was kind of cool is this coordinate conversion button. So if you click it, it opens the coordinate conversion pane, right? And what this is going to do is automatically convert whatever your coordinate system you're in, those coordinate values, to a different one. So what I'm going to do first is determine what my output's going to be. So I'm going to click add. And from here, I get to choose what am I going out to. Am I going out to WGS 84 latitude and longitude, either as decimal degrees, degrees decimal minutes, degrees minutes seconds, or am I going to go out to the MGRS grid, USNG grid, or a UTM grid? So I pick which I want to go out, how I want to go this out to. By the way, you can actually do multiple ones of these. So I'm just going to go with decimal degrees and go OK. You'll see it adds that down here. And what happens is when I come into my map, I can either select certain points, I can import a list of points from a CSV, for example, or I can just come into my map and just go and click. Well, I say I can just go into my map. Sorry, clicked the wrong tool. There we go. You can see it starts dropping points, and as I click those, it's going to take the coordinates. This is the converted coordinate for that location. So this just happens to be in Georgia, state plane, NAD 83, west U.S. survey feet. But this is what it would be in WGS 84. And like I said, you can add additional one. So I click add and say I wanted it in UTM. Okay. So when I click in the map, it's going to give me both. There's the WGS 84 coordinate and there's the UTM coordinate. Okay. And you expand that and gives you the northing, the easting. It's going to tell you the zone, so I can copy that zone. I can change the zone. It's going to read whatever UTM zone you're officially in there. So that's kind of a neat tool that they've added. Notice I can save the output and go ahead and export that out. If I choose to export it, I can go to a geodatabase feature class, a shapefile, a KMZ file, or a CSV. And that would be this whole list that gets exported with that. Okay, so that's kind of neat. I think something useful. If you want to delete a certain readout, you can just delete it and remove it. If you want to clear the list, you can clear the list. And like any pane, you can go ahead and close it, and whatnot. So that's kind of a neat tool that they've added in here. Now I mentioned graphics, right? Being able to add graphics to a map. Well, we've always been able to do that in layout because you can add titles and north arrows and all those things. But to do it in a map, which is something I used a lot with ArcMap when creating, exhibits for various reports and presentations and whatnot on that. But it's something in Pro we haven't been able to do. And the nice thing about doing it directly in the map is I put it somewhere, it stays there. It won't move within the layout. Okay, so if I go in here, if I want to add graphics to this, something, a call out or a point or whatever I'm going to do. First thing I'm going to do is add a graphics layer. So I click this button up here. See, it adds that into my contents pane as a graphics layer. When I do that, you'll also notice you get a couple of tabs that appear in the ribbon. So if I go to the graphics tab, this is where I can go in and insert. So I can do a rectangular text, a polygon text, just a straight text, curved text. I can do rectangles, polygons, points, insert pictures, a lasso, shape, lines, curved lines, and so on, right? So you can click the little drop down here. Now, does this have as many options as ArcMap did on the drawing toolbar? That's where most people added this stuff. No, it doesn't. But it's in, at least this is in here. And honestly, this is the majority of things I used. I know other people may have different, but these are most of the things I used from the drawing toolbar in ArcMap. So this is a big step forward in my mind. So if I want to come in and put in a piece of text, and so I'm going to click the text, the straight text. I just click here. I go Tripp's home. That's not really my home, but anyway, there's that. Notice you can change the font and colors and all of that from up here. You can choose to change your alignments and things from up here. Group graphic elements together and whatnot. And of course, it has to be selected to be able to change it here, but I can select it. Whoops, got to use this right select tool. So select, now that's selected. If I want to, I can also right click on it. Go to properties. So it's going to open the properties over here in the format text pane. So this is another place I can go to change things, like if I want to make it not the text fit, outline color, make it red, apply that to it, whatever other colors I want to change there. There we go. Got to hit the right thing. If I want to put a halo around it, I can go here to put the halo around it and control the size of the halo and so forth and so on. Apply that. You can see it looks horrible, but you're getting the idea. There we go. We can fix that. So I can change things here. I can sometimes change things up here. Just depends on what I'm working on, what I'm trying to do. I can make it bigger by grabbing the text box and resizing it that way. And this is a graphics element. It's not part of a shape file. It's not part of a geodatabase. It's just a graphic element that will be here and always be here. And it'll show up in the layout in the fixed location. Okay. And let's see, I can rotate it and do all these things just like we could in ArcMap. So I think that's, a pretty cool function that they've added in here to the new version of ArcPro. Like I said, you can do other things, like draw a polygon. So if you're trying to call out an area for a project, maybe whatever that would look like, there's it. You can set the fill if you want to give it a fill, and whatever, right? So you can go and change things. You can also send it backwards or forwards, and if you have multiple graphics on top of each other. So pretty cool functionality they've added here at 2.6. And again, you've got the select tool for these elements. It's like the select element tool in ArcMap. So you can select these, delete them, make them go away. And again, these only are going to exist in the map that you create them. And of course, that map will be in the project and so on. So it's a little different than that. So very excited to see that functionality added in here, because it's something we've been asking for a very long time. So with that, let's see, what else can we talk about? Okay, so I'm going to jump in here back to PowerPoint, because some of this I just don't have data to work with at the present moment to show you. But one of the fallbacks with ArcPro, the earlier versions, was they had dropped support for geometric networks. Instead, they were saying that if you worked with like utility data and whatnot, that you would need to go to the Esri utility network, which is not necessarily a bad thing. The utility network is very capable. It has a lot of functionality built into it, a lot more so than you had with the geometric network. But sometimes I just want to verify connectivity. I may need to do a network trace to see what happens if certain valve is shut, or we shut off a switch or something like that, depending on what kind of network you're working with. And the utility network is way overkill for that kind of thing. So at 2.6, they're introducing this trace network, which from what I can tell is pretty much the same thing in general concept as a geometric network. Matter of fact, you can see that Esri has a tool in here that'll convert a geometric network to a trace network, so that you can do those same kind of things, those traces, connectivity checks and whatnot that you were accustomed to doing in the older geometric network. And it's a lot less complicated than all the hoops you got to jump through to get things into the new utility network. So this is, I think, a very big step in the right direction. With now being part of the Davy Resource Group, we use a lot of geometric networks to verify connectivity across an electrical system, as well as getting into water, wastewater systems, natural gas, and all that. So this has been a big thing that has kept us from migrating over to Pro for a lot of our utility projects, because we didn't have the time and the budget to convert everybody over to the utility network just to make sure the data is all clean and connected the way it's supposed to be. So very excited to see this new network that's being introduced at ArcPro 2.6. Now, I should add that let me back that up. I should add that ArcMap, as far as I know, won't be able to read this. So if you have data that's in a trace network that you converted from geometric network, that means ArcMap won't be able to access it anymore. I think that's the case. I also believe that this will be compatible with enterprise or workgroup geodatabases in ArcGIS Enterprise 10.8.1. I think that's the case. I'm pretty sure that's the case. So if you're in an SDE type environment and want to run Pro and use the trace network, you'll be able to do that if you upgrade to 10.8.1, which is another release candidate version, is available to certain partners and whatnot. The full-blown version should be coming out in that fairly soon. So that's something to know. But as you can see, it has its own toolbox in the geoprocessing tool set, as well as once you get it running, it's going to have its own tab in the ribbon for validating topologies, establishing all of your nodes, upstream, downstream connections, edges, all of those things you got to do in there for this. So it's pretty exciting to see this added in to that. And like I said, I don't have any data to demo this, or I would for you, but I don't have any right now. Another new thing they've added that goes along with ArcGIS Pro's continued support of 3D data is the support for voxel layers. And I'll be honest, this is something that's fairly new to me as well. But a voxel layer is, it looks like a raster data set, but it's going to be stored as a net CDF file. And you can use this either as a surface or a volume type calculation tool. And so you bring this in and it's going to display it in 3D. So this only works in a local, I think it only works in a local scene for right now. Don't think it works in a global scene, which is kind of weird because some of the data sets are pretty big. So what does this actually look like? So let me actually bump back over to Arc Pro and kind of show you one of these and how to bring one in. So I've got a local scene over here in Arc Pro that I've got. Now I'm going to insert a voxel layer. And remember, it's got to be in that net CDF format. So to do that, I can go up here to Add Data on the Map tab and go down. And I think there it is, Multi-Dimensional Voxel Layer. So I'm going to click that. I'm going to point to my data source, which I've got right here. And I'm going to hit OK. And notice this has different multiple types of data sets that you can bring in. I'm just going to go with all of these. And these are different ways you can visualize the data, by the way. So I'm going to just accept that and go OK. So now as I'm bringing this in, see it's coming in my Explorer tool. So now I can rotate this down. And you can actually see that it is indeed a 3D data set, right? I can rotate around and see the different data sets. Now you can see this is set to being a volume. I can also look at it as a surface in there. Set up ISO surface or sections. I haven't made any sections or whatnot here, so it's not showing anything at the moment. But once I get this in, and bring it back up, try to rotate it correctly here. So with this here, if you go up on the data tab, you can click slice and selection, which opens this toolbar here. So with that, I can actually go and do basically create a cross section, as it were. So if I want to look at it, and notice you can do it vertically or horizontally, depending on the tools, and then rotate that around. So if I wanted to look at, say, what does that voxel layer look like? See if I can, come on, there we go. And I can control that line, right? I can drag it around and look at it here. So if I want to look at it, say here, close to the equator, there we go. So it's now going to slice that out. So this part is going to be the visible part, okay? And now with that slice, and you see it's added it over here. So you can create multiple slices. Back to map and the Explorer tool. If I roll this back down, you can see it's now cut it off down here, right? And I can zoom in closer. And each one of these bands corresponds with this. In this case, it's the apparent oxygen utilization of the oceans at various depths, right? So you can see greater utilization up here, less utilization down here. At least I think that's how it's looking, which would make sense, okay? So you can look at those there. And there's a lot of other things you can do with a voxel layer. I can make an adjustment to where that slider is. Now that I've created the slice, I can adjust it with this position over here in the voxel exploration pane. I can control tilt and orientations and things of that nature, and look at various slices and save those settings in here. So you can take multiple looks at those, okay? I can control appearances with these and control my diffusions and all that. So remember those variables that I could import, so I can change what those I'm looking at, various concentrations. in there. Like I said, I'm still very new to this myself, so I was kind of learning it as we go. But I think as we get more and more into 3D analysis and working with bigger data sets and things of this nature, this will be a pretty handy tool for doing so in there. Some other improvements, if you do work with LiDAR data, at 2.6, you can create pyramids with LAS files. So just like we've done in the past with TIFFs and other raster images where you build pyramids so it improves the overall performance, redraw, and all that, we can now do the same thing with LiDAR data with those point clouds in LAS files. So we get improved performance with that. So I said, these are just a few of the what I thought were pretty useful improvements that they've made. This is by far not the end all and be all of all the new improvements that they've made. As a matter of fact, if I go into the help here, bring this over where we're not seeing it, and go into what's new, you can see that there's a whole lot of other improvements they've made, like interactive suitability analysis for suitability modeling has been added. That's a pretty neat capability. If you're working with the parcel fabric, you can do least squares adjustments on there and evaluate the overall accuracy of your parcels that are in the parcel fabric. And this is the Arc Pro parcel fabric, not the ArcMap parcel fabric. Link analysis for seeing how things are interconnected. We'll talk about that in a minute. So there's a long list of improvements that have been added. Oh, and I know one thing I was going to show you. Let me get that out of the way. Here is, I talked about map series being able to use bookmarks as an index. So when you go up and set up a map series, which again, if you're used to ArcMap, that's data-driven pages. In Arc Pro, before when we wanted to set this up, we either had none, meaning it wasn't going to do it, or you had spatial. Those were your only two options. At 2.6, you can see they've added bookmarks. So I can pick that, choose to replace it, and it's going to pull all of the bookmarks that are associated with the map that's referenced in the map frame here. So that's where it's going to pull that from. So each one of these bookmarks, Washington Park, Legion Park, Sweetwater Park, would then be pages in that series. Okay, I go OK, and so you can see it now. The page number is showing up as Washington Park, Legion Park, Sweetwater Park, and so on. So we can use bookmarks as well to define the pages that are in our map series or map book, atlas, whatever you want to call it there, which again adds greater capability and functionality to something that was already there. So that was pretty exciting as well. So again, I mentioned link analysis. This is something new in 2.6. It allows you to generate a network of interconnected objects so you can see patterns, trends, find hidden connections. And it gets displayed as this link chart, which you see here, which is kind of cool. Again, didn't have data to set one of these up, but notice it is possible. So I hope you've seen some neat things with the new version of ArcGIS Pro that is coming out very, very soon. Also want to give a quick plug to my new book, Learning ArcGIS Pro 2. It's the second edition of my first Learning ArcGIS Pro book. It is set up for this new version when it comes out. You can also do it with 2.5 as well. Other than some of the screenshots obviously being a little different, whatnot, it will work at 2.5. But it's set up to run with 2.6, so it'll have all those new improvements and things included in it and look correct for the new version. So the new book just came out this week, so look for it on Amazon as well as Packet Publishing to get your own copy of that. So very excited to have that done. So, hope you've enjoyed this, learned a thing or two. Remember, EGIS Associates, which is now part of the Davie Resource Group, we're here to really help you leverage the power of GIS, that power of place. with all of the Esri technology standards and all that that are always changing, it seems like. But if you need help, we're here. Whether that's through enterprise GIS implementation, strategic planning, needs assessments, integrating with other systems, or maybe you need some staffing assistance with on-site staff, remote staff to help you with that big project that's getting started, or maybe your GIS person just quit and you don't want to have to hire a new person. We can help you with that. And of course, we provide training and support. So if you need training on the new versions of ArcGIS Pro, or how to work with ArcGIS Online, or whatnot, we can help you with all of those things as well. So feel free to reach out to us. You've got our website at www.egisassociates.com. You can give us a call at 678-710-9710, or shoot us an email at info@egisassociates.com. So with that, again, don't forget about my new book, Learning ArcGIS Pro 2. I'll try to make sure to put links in the description for you so you can get to that if you're interested. And as always, make sure to continue to subscribe to the channel if you like the content. If you want to be updated when we produce new videos, make sure to hit the notification bell. That, guys, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.